I guess if you say so, I'll have to pack my things and go.
That's right, hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
What you say?
Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
Now, baby, listen, baby, don't you treat me this way, 'cause I'll be back on my feet someday.
Don't care if you do, 'cause it's understood. You ain't got no money, you just ain't no good.
Well, I guess if you say so, I'll have to pack my things and go.
That's right, hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
What you say?
Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back no more.
Well,
Don't you come back no more.
what you said?
Don't you come back no more.
I didn't understand
Don't
you.
you come back no more.
You can't mean that.
And don't you come back no
Oh,
more.
now, baby, please.
Don't you come back no more.
What you trying to do to me?
Come back no more.
Oh, don't hurt me like that, baby.
Greens, cartoon and football fans. This is Robbie Graham
And Bob Mozart.
of the USCFL Network welcoming you to our very first joint podcast as we will talk about and review Season 1 of Velma. Before we continue, we'd like for you to join the USCFL's family. We cordially invite you to experience everything this channel has to offer. And this is your invitation to subscribe to our channel and join our team. We strive to be one of YouTube's least offensive channels by providing a different spin about your favorite cartoon characters from the past and present that does not reflect on their true legacies. If your favorite character or characters aren't mentioned in our videos, please leave a comment and we will answer your questions. Also be sure to ring the bell to alert you of when we put up any new video. To briefly recap what we did here on this channel as far as Velma is concerned, between the periods of January 21st and February 18th, Bob Wilson and I put out videos and we did our episode runoff for Velma. Bob did the description of each episode and his score for each episode. And just like with pretty much everyone else, the scoring was very low. In fact, no points were scored higher than a 3 at any point during that runoff. And as a whole, and in total, Velma scored only 19 points out of a possible 80 points, with a percentage rate of 23.8% based on the maximum score of 80 points. With our football scoring system, an 8 is the best score any episode can get. And the 80 points was the maximum score, assuming that every episode got a perfect score of 8. But this time, we're just going to talk about the episodes one by one and give our opinions about it. But before we do that, we'd like to tell you how we experienced Scooby-Doo for the very first time in our lives. Bob, when did you first start seeing Scooby-Doo for the very first time?
I first watched it as a teenager when the Scooby-Doo Where Are You came out in 1969, and I've enjoyed it ever since. They've had some series that weren't as good as others, but in general, I really do like the concept of, the 4 teenagers and a dog driving around in a van and solving mysteries.
And as for me, I was only about 19 months old when Scooby-Doo first came out in '69, and I was too young to remember the original run of Scooby-Doo Where Are You and the new Scooby-Doo movies in 1972. But I later on as I got older and the shows went into syndication, did I see these original variations of the show. When Scooby-Doo moved from CBS to ABC in 1976, that is when I really got my first real exposure that I remember watching Scooby-Doo. I also agree that some variations of the show are better than others, but I think that Bob and I agree with just about everyone on social media, regardless of who we vote for, the colors of our skin, the religions we practice, or any other demographic. We agree that this show was by far the worst show either of us have ever seen. And now we're going to explain to you why. And we're going to begin with episode 1, which was entitled Velma. Bob, what was your take on this episode?
Well, from the very beginning, the show falsely advertised itself. To quote Velma, said, "I've decided to finally share the bone-chilling events that drove me to assemble the greatest team of spooky mystery solvers ever." Well, that's not true. There were never a team. Velma did things with Norval. She did things with Daphne, with Fred. Daphne and Fred did things together. Daphne and Norval did things together. But at no point were the four of them ever united in purpose and working together to solve a single mystery. Velma had her mystery, trying to find out what happened to her mother. Daphne had her mystery, trying to find out what happened to her birth parents. Fred had his issues with his parents and trying to prove himself worthy of taking over the mantle of the Jones fine gentleman clothes. And Norval was trying to make his way first as attracted to Velma and then to Gigi, but at no point were the four of them ever united. And then as soon as the mystery was solved, they broke apart.
And we'll get to that later on when we talk about episode 10. And I don't know, outside of Charlie Grandy, who was the executive producer of this series and showrunner, and Mindy Kaling, who also was a co-executive producer in this series and voiced Velma, I don't know where they got the idea to race swap the four main characters. I don't know where they got the idea to make Velma a narcissistic witch. I don't want to try to use such bad language on my end. But Bob was right. There is no I in team. There was absolutely no teamwork whatsoever. And Velma just had delusions of grandeur, if you want my honest opinion about it. She thought she was the greatest thing since sliced bread throughout the entire season. And everything had to revolve around her. And I'm sorry to say, Mindy Kaling, the world does not revolve around you, and it does not revolve around your interpretation of Velma. Nobody really minded fully of the race swapping. Nobody really minded some of the animations. The animation where Velma had her hallucinations were pretty good, and I agree. And I've heard that mentioned in other YouTube videos. But as a whole, this show just absolutely stunk like yesterday's trash. And I just don't know what the people behind this series was drinking or smoking, thinking that this show was going to be a major hit. And IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes have spoken, and usually they try to favor the people behind certain shows, but everybody was in agreement, both critics and fans alike. This show was the worst show ever put to television. Now, let's talk about episode 2, which was entitled The Candyman, or the Candy Woman with W-O in parentheses. Bob, go ahead. What was your take on episode 2?
Well, this was the episode where they basically trashed Velma and Daphne, making them into drug dealers. Now, that's just not right because they were always on the side of law. They were trying to track down the counterfeiters and real estate speculators and bank robbers and put criminals behind bars, not become criminals. Now, I think that part of the problem was that this show tried to copy the Harley Quinn, and except that Harley Quinn is a show about a criminal, and this is Scooby-Doo gang were not criminals.
I've heard the same thing too about this show being compared to Harley Quinn in one respect that this show was trying to imitate it in one respect or another. We have a vast library of shows here on this channel, and we have Harley Quinn's show in our library, and it's a good show. It really is. But the idea to make Daphne and Velma drug dealers, again, I don't know where they thought that was going to fly with fans. And Bob is right. You got to remember, this show dates back to the late 1960s. Now, of course, back in those days, sex, drugs, and rock and roll were all the rage back then. 69 was the year of Woodstock, the Apollo moon landing, and other such big-time events. But the problem is that Hanna-Barbera would have been roasted like a pig at a luau if they were to have even slightly incorporated the idea that all 4 Mystery Inc. Gang members were potheads or lesbians or whatever. And that was the problem with episode 2. Not only were Daphne and Velma trying to become drug dealers, but they also kissed at the end of the episode. Now, again, it has been speculated for decades that Velma might be or could be a lesbian. And again, nobody really has a problem with that. But this show just took it one step too far. And it just went overboard in that respect. And one thing that I had a problem with myself personally is that I worked in customer service for many years. And I know this for a fact, and I don't have to be one to know this. No drug dealer in their right mind is going to advertise that they're selling drugs. And the way that Velma did it was like being at a vendor at a sporting event. Now, tell me if anybody ever heard this at a football game, a baseball game, a basketball game, or a hockey game. Peanuts, popcorn, get your red hots, get them while they're red hot. That's exactly how Velma was trying to advertise the fact that she was selling drugs. And even the worst drug dealer in the world is not going to do that. And real quickly, Bob, am I right with that assumption, or am I sort of off the beaten track here?
Well, the issue is that it is untrue to the characters to make them drug dealers. But if Velma is going to be a drug dealer, then she'll be a successful one, not, incompetent one. And that whole episode 2 was all about her incompetence.
And another thing that a lot of people had a problem with also was that all the drugs that Daphne was trying to sell were all the catchphrases that are used in the regular series. You heard her say, I've got Jeepers, Jinkies, Zoinks, Mystery Machine, and of course, Ganja.
Yes.
Yeah, that that was just crazy, you know. I mean, it was one thing for them to sell drugs, but did they have to incorporate all the catchphrases that the gang normally uses in the original series? That really was a slap in the face, and I agree with that. Now, let's talk about episode 3, which was titled Velma Kai. And this episode was just weird.
Yeah, you had a couple of things going on here. Velma is trying to find out more about her mother's disappearance. However, Fred, who has some of the answers, is in prison as a result of the events in episode 2. And so Velma has to go and interview him at the prison, but that doesn't go over very well because she keeps having hallucinations anytime she starts to investigate anything. But she did find some things out that tied her mother's disappearance to going to the Fred family, the Jones mansion. In the meantime, at the school was trying to have a training for the girls to protect them from the serial killer, but that training was basically to set up a mixed martial arts tournament, and whoever wins it is going to be declared to be the least vulnerable girl.
Well, just to go back to episodes 1 and 2 real quick, another problem was that the first victim was stuffed in Velma's locker. She got arrested and accused of murder, and the police gave her 24 hours to find another person to pin the murder on. Now, no cop in their right mind, even the bad ones, is going to make someone do that. That's called being a scapegoat, and I think that's highly illegal, if I'm not mistaken. And then the first episode ends with another body being found in front of Velma's house, stuffed in a recycling bin in the same manner, with her brains taken out. And to blame someone else, that was crazy. And also, the cops were just absolute incompetent. They were just absolutely incompetent and unconscionable. You don't draw guns on a 15-year-old. I don't care what kind of personality that 15-year-old's got, but you don't draw a gun on a 15-year-old, accuse them of murder, and make them try to find someone else to pin the crime on. That doesn't work for real. Believe me, it doesn't. And then Fred did not know who Velma was. He thought she was Mexican, and he was just too in on himself. And then he eventually shows Velma that he hasn't blossomed yet into puberty. There are some boys and girls out there who might be 14, 15, 16 years old who haven't quite fully developed yet. Some people did. Some kids did. Some kids don't. But it's really nothing to be ashamed of, you know. I can understand Fred being a little self-conscious about it. I certainly would not want to be made fun of if I am in school and I at that age and went to the boys' room to do my thing, and everybody takes one look at my equipment and laughs at me because it's not big enough for them. No, I can understand where Fred was coming from in one respect. That didn't happen to me, but I'm just pointing something out. And in episode 2, Fred is taken to court. They tried to make him into Little Lord Fauntleroy by dressing him up in virtually baby clothing and acting childish, to say the least. And then it begins to rain, and his makeup runs, and I guess they did something with his eyelashes. One of them fell off onto his upper lip, and then everybody is comparing him to Hitler, and they said that, everyone compares Hitler to everyone else these days. I seriously doubt that that would ever be the case. I don't think nobody compared Hitler to anyone after World War II, and they're certainly not going to do that in 2023. And the idea was just ludicrous. But I get the strategy that Velma's dad had to make Fred in court prove that he could not possibly had killed anyone because he can't cut a steak. If you can't cut a steak, how are you going to cut a person's head open and take their brains out? I get the idea from a legal standpoint, but that sort of theatrics would not fly in any courtroom anywhere. And then Fred gets all upset that people were laughing at him because of his incompetence, and makes that and blurts out that he could have killed those two girls if he wanted to, and they find him guilty. Saying something like that is not going to mean that you're guilty. You still need proof that you committed a heinous crime. Bob, real quickly, what was your opinion on that particular point?
Well, basically every adult in Crystal Cove was completely incompetent, and every institution in Crystal Cove was incompetent, and so I wasn't surprised. I mean, basically, the only competent person in the entire series was Norville, but everybody else makes stupid decisions.
Indeed, they did. And even Sophie, who was Velma's dad's mistress, also was kind of dumb because all she really cared about was posing for pictures. She was practically ready to give birth, and the baby's hand and head were bulging out of her stomach, and that was just absolutely gross. In reality, no woman is going to have a situation like that where that a part of the baby is going to protrude out of the belly like that. Yes, the baby's going to kick, but not to the point where she's going to the baby's going to protrude in some way. Just doesn't happen. Now, let's talk about episode 4. Velma makes a list. Yeah, Velma makes a list, checks it twice, and finds out who's naughty or nice. What about it, Bob?
Well, Velma didn't have a list, so she tries to get Daphne to help her with it, and tries to get Norval and then Fred, because she is so dislikes all of the hot girls that it's just she can't stand the idea of making the list. But in the end, they do come up with a list, and so those girls, they say, "Oh well, we'll teach them not to be hot, and then they will no longer be a victim." In the meantime, Velma is teaching Fred to be a feminist and not to objectify women. But this episode was more or less the political episode where Mindy Kaling got to get up on her flagpole and talk about, the evil patriarchy and, how bad women have it, and then these other things, rather than having a show to entertain people.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate too, because this show should not have been, should not have had any kind of an agenda whatsoever. it's supposed to be an animated show originally meant for kids. And could you imagine if the original series was like that, where everybody had an opinion about something, whether it was racial, political, religious, or anything of that nature? Like I said, Scooby-Doo would not have been around as long as it had Hanna-Barbera gone down that road. And and going back real quickly to episode 3, the idea of making young girls and even young women to try to learn self-defense is a great idea. I have no problem with that, and I think everybody, man or woman, should learn how to protect themselves and defend themselves if they should be under attack in some way. But this show just took it a little too far, and of course Daphne put Velma through a wall, and Velma said, "Well, thanks to Daphne, my tubes are tied." Medically, that would be impossible. Tubes are only tied by operation. No more than a vasectomy is done by operation. That would have been like Fred kicking Shaggy through a wall, and Shaggy said, "Well, I now have a vasectomy thanks to Fred." It doesn't work that way. But again, Minnie Kaling did indeed got on her soapbox and just started talking about all kinds of junk that should not have been in this show, period. And when Fred is given a copy of The Feminine Mystique, he initially thought that it was about Mystique of the X-Men, which is not the case. He also thought the book Man and Superman had to do with Superman, which of course it doesn't. But one thing I do give Velma credit for in this episode was she tried her best to get paramedics to come when Sophie went into labor, and she was out there on the sidewalk in pain, in agony, and was about ready to give birth, and everybody was around her taking pictures of it. And one of the hot girls said that, "Oh, well, that's what social media is for." I would never put to video a woman going through agony if she goes into labor. I certainly wouldn't do that, and I don't think anybody else in their right mind wouldn't do such a thing. But I do give Velma credit only in the sense that she did help Sophie give birth to the baby, and it was a healthy birth. It was a beautiful baby girl, and in one respect, Velma should be pleased with herself. But also going to the idea that hot girls were the object of the serial killer. I don't fully agree with that, because anybody could get killed heinously regardless of what they look like. It could be a young person, it could be an old person, it could be an attractive person or a not so attractive person. It doesn't work like that in real life, where only pretty girls are getting murdered. If that were the case, women by the millions would be killed every year just because they're pretty. I'm sorry, that doesn't work like that. And I don't really give Fred full credit on changing his opinion about women. In one respect, it was a good thing that he did look at any woman for who and what they are, as opposed to how they look. I do give him credit for that. But he could have been brought up in an environment to respect women and men alike. And it doesn't matter if Fred becomes successful or not, but his parents certainly didn't do any kind of credit to him for raising him the way they did. And it's just unfortunate that Fred was depicted in this manner. All right, let's talk about episode 5 and the episode Marching Band Sleepover. Bob, I'm telling you, that episode was even kookier than the last.
Yes, the town has put in a curfew in order to protect people and that lasted for a couple of episodes. And so Velma is wanting to conduct an investigation, but she figures out that the easiest way to do that is to get everybody over to her house, and then that will mean that Norval, who's one of the band members, will be at her house, and then she can get him to help her with her investigation. In the meantime, Norval had taken up with Gigi, one of Daphne's friends, and so Norval is no longer interested in Velma, and Velma is a bit nonplussed because she's so used to having Norval under her thumb that she can get him to do whatever she wants, whenever she wants. And now that's not the case.
Yeah, I understand that too, because Norville, pretty much from when he was first introduced back in episode 1, was pretty much a pushover for Velma. And even after he met Gigi at the end of episode 4, and it was nice that they did develop a relationship at the beginning of episode 5, but Gigi was no more what Velma did to Norville in this series. He pretty much was at the mercy of her instead of just being at the mercy of Velma, and then the town is under lockdown because of the serial killer still being on the loose, and the sheriff would arrest anybody who broke the curfew. So initially, the marching band sleepover was going to be canceled, and it was initially supposed to have been held at the high school's gymnasium. But because of the curfew, everything was canceled, and then somehow either Norval or Velma convinced the band to come to Velma's house to have the sleepover. And every member of the band was told by their parents to make sure that they ate with their medicine. And they were all geeks, and they all apparently on some kind of medication where you got to take food. Now that's true. A lot of medicines can be taken with or without food. But for everybody to have to eat in order to take their medicine, well, excuse me, was really crazy. So then Gigi joins the band after signing up with the registrar's office, and then she tells Velma that she's a flutist, and Velma said the same thing, that she was also a flutist, and they had a flute off where neither one was good at playing the flute. They were all off key, and everybody were holding their ears, but Norville was sort of like brown-nosing Gigi for going like, "Good job, girl, good job. You play the flute very well." I'm not musically inclined, but I could play the flute better than either one of them. But I also will give Fred a little bit of credit because he did try to help Velma out for the fact that there was no food in the house to be had. One of the band members was consuming baking soda right out of the box, and another band member was seen eating the carpet. That was sort of reminiscent of a controversial cow and chicken episode where a biker gang came to people's homes and ate their carpeting. But I do give Fred credit in one respect that he did try to get pizzas for the band to help Velma out. But he goofed at the when everything was going right. He goofed at the very end, and all the pizzas got destroyed in the streets. So Velma convinces Norville at Gigi's displeasure to drive Velma and Fred and Gigi over to Spooner's Cafe where Sophie works and try to get food there. But to do that, they needed to steal a police car that was parked in front of Daphne's house and convince Daphne to give Norville the keys. Then they go to the diner, but they don't go in the diner to buy food. They get it from the dumpster with cockroaches going all over the place. Man, I'll tell you, whoever thought that was a good idea should really be ashamed of themselves. I would not even would allow the homeless to go dumpster diving, especially if the food is no good and it's not right to begin with. And for them to do that, that was just absolutely disgusting. And it was just something that that I don't give anybody credit for. They could have gone into the restaurant. Sophie runs the place. She owns the place. And she could have given them fresh food right off the griddle or the fryer. That's the way I look at it. And at the end of this episode, Daphne breaks curfew by going into an abandoned mine that hadn't been used in decades, and eventually runs into what will eventually become in the next episode her adoptive parents, and they're both at that particular moment dressed like the classic Hanna-Barbera Captain Caveman. But we'll get to that in episode 6, which is now the sins of the fathers and some of the mothers. Bob, I'm telling you, I just feel so bad for Scooby-Doo that he was reduced to a series of initials in this series.
Yes, there was a lot of stuff that went on in this show where they were trying to say, "Oh, we respect Scooby-Doo, and so here's how we show we respect Scooby-Doo. We'll use his initials." But it's not very respectful at all. Now, this issue, episode 6, this is the one where Velma's father doesn't want to be around the house and help take care of his newborn baby. So he tries to pretend to Velma that he's interested in having a relationship with her. And he takes her to a strip club, as if any father is going to take their 15-year-old daughter to a strip club. And, that just went from bad to worst.
Yeah, I know. And again, I'll say this again. The way they did Scooby-Doo wrong is it's just incredible, because Scooby-Doo is the franchise. And to do a Scooby-Doo show without Scooby-Doo is, like I have said in the past, would be like ordering a cheeseburger and hold the cheese. You just don't do that, and you reduce him to a series of initials and an acronym, and then Velma goes, "Well, what did Scooby do?" Oh, brother. Why not just take a gun and shoot Scooby and put him out of his misery? In one respect, I'm glad that he wasn't even in this show at all. Now, it's possible that he might turn up in season 2, but nobody really knows that for sure, and we certainly don't know that for sure just yet. But Daphne was kind of bold to go into this abandoned mine and eventually meet her biological parents. And and uh, and I'm sorry, I'll get to that in a moment. But yes, I definitely agree. You do not take a teenage girl or even a teenage boy to a strip club um, and not be thrown out of the place. Um, and it doesn't matter if it's your son or daughter or not. You can have a friend who's a teenager, barely old enough, still a minor, and you don't take them to a strip club. I don't care if a father takes his son, who's not 18 yet, to a strip club and tries to make a man out of him. That's what Fred's father did as well, because Fred was also in in that strip club as well, and Velma's father helped to get a stripper at that club out of her contract so that she could be Fred's love interest, which in episode 7, no, was it episode 6 or 7, where after this older woman gets a hold of something and runs away from the mansion. Was that episode 6 or 7?
Yes, I believe it was episode 6, but I mean, it's just one of the many things where they tried to show that, that everybody's taking advantage of Fred.
Right. Now, I'm going to tell you something, and I say this to anyone. You can be a mother or a father. You can be a career person or hold down a job and still raise a family. And you have to have a balance between the two. Otherwise, one suffers and the other one doesn't. And that's what Velma's dad did in this series. I don't think he could have cared less about Velma at all, period. And he certainly didn't seem to give a hoot about his newly born other daughter. And to take paternity leave is all well and good. Where we now have a law here in the U.S. where a parent can take up to 12 weeks off without being in danger of losing their jobs to care for a newly born infant. But but to totally ignore the children and then go back to work to escape caring for a newborn child, that doesn't fly with me. I'm not a father, but I know that would not fly with me. And I don't think anybody who's ever had children would do that to their kids. Again, you can be both. You can be a career work person. You could be a mother or a father. You just have to have a balance. And in Daphne's case, her parents were using her to take these crystals out of the mine. I don't know what those crystals really were supposed to be for. But in my opinion, and this is my opinion only, I think those crystals were pretty much nothing more than real valuable gems. It could have been a diamond type gem, could have been some other kind of gemstone that would have been worth a fortune. And they were just taking this stuff out of the mine in big, huge bags. And Daphne's father points a gun at her towards the end of this episode. And again, what self-respecting parent is gonna put a gun to their kid's head? Come on. This show is just out of whack. Just pure out of whack. Bob, I know that you're a parent. Would you have known anybody to have done that?
No, and then they were supposedly saying, we'll answer one of the big mysteries. You know, how come Daphne, who is East Asian genetically. Why does she have orange hair? And they said, oh, it's because her mother smoked during pregnancy. And that's just a ridiculous excuse for explaining away Daphne's orange hair.
Well, I'll tell you this much, and this is a medical fact, and I'm not a doctor, but anybody worth their anybody with half a mind would know that a woman should not smoke or drink alcohol during pregnancy, even if they did both things before they got pregnant. Once they realize they are pregnant, they stop smoking, they stop drinking. And even if they did smoke and drink during the pregnancy, and if this is the case, Daphne would have been born with a whole bunch of birth defects, and not just red hair. And red hair is heredity. Your hair color, your eye color, your facial features are all heredity. If your mother or father had red hair, your child possibly could be a redhead. If your mother or father had blue eyes, chances are your child's going to have blue eyes. If your mom or dad has a certain size of nose, or a certain shape of their ears, or their mouth, or whatever, the child could have those traits as well. But the idea that, oh, I smoked during pregnancy and that's why you've got red hair, no doctor is going to say that that would be the case. Because again, Daphne would have been born with a whole bunch of birth defects, or, God forbid, would have been stillborn. And this show doesn't even know anything medically. And I'm not a doctor. Even I know that. Well, let's talk about episode 7 now, and the episode called Fog Fest. And if this show hasn't broken the fourth wall by now, episode 7 certainly did that.
Yes, there was this town that supposedly was having such a strict curfew. But then when the time for the annual Fog Fest comes along, they just throw the curfew away. They do keep one thing. They say that, well, in order to protect them, women that want to attend the Fog Fest have to have a date. And so Velma doesn't have a date, can't get into the Fog Fest. She disguises herself as a man and finds out that, oh, surprise, men have a privileged position in society. The things that she gets criticized for doing as a woman, when she's a man, no problem.
Yeah, that's right. And here's the thing about this episode that a lot of people found on YouTube kind of, well, not insulting, but they did point this out. That one YouTuber that I saw their video from pointed out the fact that the idea of lifting the curfew with a serial killer still on the loose was compared to what we all dealt with COVID-19. Okay, well, COVID-19 may no longer be a factor. Let's go out and do what we did beforehand. Now, as you know that this disease killed millions of people all over the world, and going outside was just not an option for anyone. Unless, of course, they had to go out for some reason. It could be, first responders responding to a medical emergency, or the police trying to investigate a crime, or maybe the average person like you and me, maybe running errands and stuff like that. But that's what we had delivery services for. I only went out when necessary during the pandemic. And even now, I still only go out when necessary. And a lot of the errands I run, I can do from my car and have no interaction with people whatsoever. So that's just the way it was. And I do agree a little bit with that comparison. And I agree with Velma saying that people should not be out and about with a serial killer on the loose. And as it turns out, the serial killer was at this festival. And then another person said that the way that they were saying Fog King was similar to that of, pardon me for saying it, fucking. And then I admit, I didn't laugh, but I admit this was kind of funny. Fred said to Daphne, I want to fuck Fog King, thinking he said fuck King, and she slaps his face. Now, I admit that was kind of funny, but the idea of Fred throwing money at her for trying to convince her to be his date for this festival, I think Daphne would have done it without accepting $1 single, in my opinion. They were dating at the beginning of this series. And of course, Daphne wanted to get some action, if you know what I mean. And I also admit, though, that the idea of women not coming to this festival unescorted, I think that would have been a smart thing to do if this happened in real life. If there was a problem with young women getting killed, and for their safety and protection, they should be escorted by a man. It could be their father, their boyfriend, their brother, whoever, and go to some event and be safe. I get that. But they should have stayed at home and not had this festival at all to begin with. And that I do agree with. But then, without being able to go to this festival, Velma gets it in her head to dress up like a man in a full suit, a mustache, the works. And everything that she did in this episode, if she was still acting as herself, everybody would have thought that she was disgusting. But in this episode, everybody was falling all over her because they thought that she was so cool, so great and everything. And the idea for her to pee in the men's room standing up is ridiculous. Now, it is possible for a woman to urinate standing up, but it's not easy. Believe me, it is not easy. It can be done, but it's complicated. I won't go into the details. But everything Velma did, everybody seemed to go nuts over. And even Daphne wanted a piece of Velma's action, thinking that she was a guy. And then between Fred and Norville, Norville won the crown because she saved a kid from falling off the pier, which eventually the kid said that he pushed her off the pier just so that he could win the title. And then Fred exposes Velma for being her in disguise. And initially they also made her the king of this festival. And then Fred and Norville were fighting over the crown and everything, and they go through this ride that looks similar to that of a classic Scooby-Doo trope where there's a series of doorways and people are going out of one door, going into another, coming out a different door, going into a different door, and so on. Now, I will give the people behind this series just a tiny bit of credit for using Scooby-Doo chase music in this episode. But that's all the credit I'm going to give them throughout this entire season. And then once Velma is exposed, she meets Daphne under the pier, and they talk, and then Velma apologizes to Daphne for being a bad friend and all. But if this was real, the pier would have been loaded with homeless people. If they lived near a coastal community, they probably would set up shop underneath a bridge or a pier or some other place like that to spend the night, to sleep, whatever. But this episode was just absolute insanity at its least, and total lunacy at the most. And then somehow the serial killer leaves his cell phone behind, which will be explained in episode 8, which was called A Velma in the Woods. And folks, if this show didn't get crazy by now, it's going to get even crazier in episode 8. Right, Bob?
Yes. Velma is able to hack into the phone. She sees a picture of the Crystal Mount, or Mount Crystal. So she gets invited up to Gigi's house. So she persuades Norval to invite her and Daphne to go up to stay at Gigi's house. In the meantime, Daphne's trying to make Velma jealous, so she is going out with Olive, but that doesn't last too long. So Velma, Daphne, and Norval show up at Gigi's cabin, and Gigi is naked. She hides behind some pillows, and she's berating Norval. Why are you bringing these other people up here? And then with the very next breath, she's very welcoming. Hi, Velma. Hi, Daphne. In the meantime, she's naked and hiding behind some pillows.
Yeah, I know. And if you look carefully at Mount Crystal, it had the face of Billy Crystal on the side of the mountain. And I guess that's probably how the area got its name, Crystal Cove, on account of Billy Crystal. It's coincidence, but, I don't think that was the case during Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, that was also set in Crystal Cove. And this show was just nothing but a bunch of flashbacks. And at the end of episode 7, Fred ends up getting kidnapped and wakes up in this room and discovers the brains of 3 of the girls that were killed. Brenda, Lola, and oh God, what was the other girl's name? Oh damn it, I don't remember her name now. Brenda, Lola, and oh Jesus, what was the name of the other girl, Bob? I'm sorry.
Well, it was Brenda was one,
Right.
Krista the second, and then Lola was the third one.
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Krista.
Yes, right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess the Alzheimer's is kicking in. I don't know. I just turned 55 last Saturday, so I guess I'm getting more forgetful in my old age. But anyway, the point of this particular story is that somehow these 3 brains are still functioning in some strange way, and they are talking through a like a microphone type device, and the brains are in glass jars with this green liquid. I don't know what the green liquid is supposed to be. I know it's not blood, but it could be something else. But apparently it's keeping these 3 brains alive. And then once Daphne and Velma get a hold of the serial killer's phone, Daphne hacks the phone, and it turns out that the passcode for the phone is 1234. That's like having a briefcase with a combination lock on it, And the combination to open it is 1, 2, 3. Real smart, folks. Real brainy. But, and then throughout this episode, Gigi tells Norville that she's got a cabin in the woods and she wants to be alone with him. And he just never seemed to get the idea that Gigi wanted him, you know? I don't know what was going through his mind at that point. But eventually, like you said, Daphne and Velma pops up out of nowhere and comes with Norville. And Gigi gets mad at Norville, but not at Daphne or Velma in this particular situation. I like it where Gigi says that she wore edible underwear, and Velma goes, "Is there any more of that edible underwear left? I'm starving." She would eat edible underwear. She ate a French fry out of a dumpster back in episode 1. So I wouldn't put anything past Velma when it comes to eating. But eventually, Daphne and Velma, along with Norville and Gigi, end up going down this ravine and can't get out. They're pinned to this giant stone, this giant boulder. And there was a rescue team out looking for them. But they were more interested in looking for Fred, not them. And when one of the rescuers asked if Fred was with the others, and one of them said no, that he wasn't, they just lifted themselves back up in the helicopter and took off looking for Fred. And at least in one respect, that Velma finally reunites with her mother. And then they get out of this situation in a white van that looks exactly like the Mystery Machine without the paint job. But the idea that Velma's mother said, "Get into this mystery jalopy." All she had to do was say, "Let's get out of here in this van. We could drive to safety," and not compare the van as it was at that point to the Mystery Machine. Because at that point, it wasn't the Mystery Machine. You could have a classic van from the late 60s, but you can't call it the Mystery Machine unless it's painted like that. No more than you could own a 69 Dodge Charger and call it the General Lee without the paint job. This episode just was crazy. And of course, when Velma's mother was trying to answer some of Velma's questions, and then all of a sudden she develops amnesia out of nowhere, is also ridiculous. You just don't get amnesia like that. You get amnesia from a sharp blow to the head. And again, you don't have to be a doctor to know that. Well, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little hoarse here. Let's talk about episode 9, which was titled Family Woman with W-O, again in parentheses. And Bob, I think that Velma went too far to try to go to great lengths to bring her mother's memory back.
Well, this was the episode that I rated as 0, because basically they didn't do anything to solve the mystery. They didn't do anything, to improve the character of any of the different people. It was basically a comedy episode where Velma is trying to convince her mother that everything is normal at the house, except, of course, they've got a baby there. And so she pretends that it's her illegitimate baby with Norville. But she doesn't know anything about taking care of a baby, and it's very obvious that she hasn't been mothering the baby at all. So the episode just goes from start to finish, trying to convince Dia Dinkley that the situation in the home front, it's all normal. But of course, at the end, Dia realizes that everything is fake, and then suddenly she gets her memory back, and then she says, "Oh, and by the way, I'm the murderer."
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Bob, that you scored a 0 for episode 9, and I did point out at the end of the finale that it only took Bob roughly 3.5 minutes to talk about both episodes towards the end of the series, and I understand why he gave the marks that he did. But yeah, I mean, for one thing, amnesia doesn't come. You don't gain your memory back if you suffer from amnesia exactly in 72 hours. You could get it back sooner than that. You could get it back later than that. Some people could go for years without regaining their memory. It happens. But this, like I said, apparently the writers of this show did not consult with a medical professional to explain to them how amnesia really works. And the idea to put the house back the way it was, I think Velma's mother would have approved of the changes that were made. But I don't agree with Velma trying to hide the fact that Amanda wasn't her baby. I mean, and it's also plain to see that the baby did cry because she was hungry, but I think it was also apparent that Sophie was breastfeeding her. And you can't expect another woman to breastfeed another woman's child if they're breastfeeding. Now, if they're bottle feeding, that's a different matter. Anybody could feed a baby that way. Even a guy, even the father can bottle feed a baby. And I'm sure that anybody who's ever been bottle fed probably had that when they were young. But anyhow, I admit that I'm glad that Norval finally got the guts to sever ties with Velma when he did, after his house was destroyed by the police. And, you know, but Norval's father should not have left a welding mask in his office at school for anyone to find. Automatically, somebody's going to think, okay, the serial killer is wearing a welder's mask. His father is wearing a welder's mask. So they put 2 and 2 together, but didn't come up with 4. That's pretty much how I looked at it. And then Norval's father made him this very crude sword for his birthday, because apparently Norval is into swords. He tried to pawn a sword back in episode 2, and was also trying to sell his kidney on the black market for enough money to bribe Velma in liking him. And but I'm glad that at this point in the story that he did sever ties with Velma, and for everybody to go with the brains as opposed to Daphne and Fred's status on social media. I don't agree with that at all. Come on, are you really going to put a severed brain ahead of a person? All right, look, the situation was grim at the end of episode 8. They would have been crushed to death by an avalanche of rocks and boulders, and to leave the brains behind at that point would have been the sensible thing to do. But Fred picked up those brains. Their cases got cracked, and they lost the ability to speak. And at the end, he even says that the brains were beginning to smell, obviously. So apparently, those brains were sitting in formaldehyde to keep fresh for some odd reason. But to compare 3 severed brains with 2 actual living human beings is ridiculous. And for Fred and Daphne to pretend that they're dating again, they could have easily picked up their relationship at any point during this show, because they were dating initially. Daphne wanted to get in Fred's pants initially, so they had no problem pretending. They didn't need to pretend. They were already pretty much an item from the get-go. And but eventually, Velma's mother learns of the fact that her father was unfaithful to her, and used the excuse of Velma's mother being kidnapped or missing as an excuse. Excuse me, I'm sorry. As an excuse to start shacking up with another woman and getting her pregnant in the process. And that Velma's father should have listened to Velma, that her mother was indeed kidnapped or missing. He eventually found out at the end of episode 6, but it was too little too late. He could have sided with Velma from almost the very beginning. And in one respect, I am glad that Velma's mother kicked Velma's father and Sophie out on account of this. And then all of a sudden, her memory came back. And we're going to go into why this happened. And apparently, Velma's hallucinations also stopped on account of the events of episode 10. So let's get into episode 10 now, and the finale of this series called The Brains of the Operation. And Bob, I'll tell you right now, I have never seen a series finale or a season finale as bad as this show was.
Yes, the explanation just doesn't make any sense. If Fred's mother was such a master of hypnosis, why couldn't she have simply hypnotized Fred to be the son that she wanted to take over the company? Second, why, if she's going to do these experiments on taking the brains out of the girl victims and keeping them alive, why did she choose the most popular hot girls? Wouldn't it be more likely that she would find some misfit who's all alone and nobody would miss him? But to take the 3 hottest girls in the school, they're going to be instantly missed. Then
I'm sorry, what I was going to say was, of course they're going to be missed. Why wouldn't they be?
Right. So then she's impressed with Daphne, so she's thinking, okay, instead of using one of these 3 girls that she has the brains, she'll just take Daphne's brain and put Daphne's brain inside Fred. And then she changes her mind and decides that, oh, well, Velma's the smartest one, and she's a feminist and is opposed to the patriarchy, and so I'll just put Velma's brain inside of Fred. Again, none of that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. And I agree that if somebody is good at hypnosis, they could have just easily hypnotized the person they should have hypnotized in the first place to make them a different person. They went all about this the wrong way. Okay, but you also have to remember that apparently Fred's mother was the daughter of the general that thought of the idea of putting soldiers' brains into teenagers back in the early 1970s in the first place, which was why that operation was called, or the acronym for it was Scooby. But I agree, she could have just easily hypnotized Fred without killing anyone. But, Velma just showed her true colors once and for all towards the end of this episode, and I'll get to that in a moment. So you got Fred and Daphne and Velma tied up, and Fred's mother was about to operate on all 3 of them. taking the brains out of either Daphne or Velma and putting it in Fred's brain. That is not going to happen because, again, the brains will not live long enough outside the human body for that to even work. And then Velma starts spewing out this gibberish that got Fred mad to the point where he breaks free and stands up to his mother. And then Norville comes into the picture, professing his love for Velma and using the sword that he wanted to try to pawn back in episode 1, when Fred's mother uses a gun and fires a bullet that goes straight up in the air towards Norville, and Norville deflects the bullet with his sword, and the bullet hits a stalactite and falls right on Fred's mother, killing her instantly. Everybody was covered in blood. Norville was tossing his cookies soon afterwards. Velma and Fred were both in shock, and Velma just started twerking. Even Miley Cyrus doesn't twerk anymore, and she's the one who invented that. And it was like, Velma going like, "Oh yeah, I'm number one. I'm good. I'm good." And I also agree with a lot of YouTube videos that said that pretty much Velma just stumbled into everything and eventually put the pieces together. She didn't really find any real clues or real ideas that would lead towards a solution. And again, this was not how the original series was to be. Everybody played a part in the original series. Fred was the leader of the group. Initially, Daphne was the damsel in distress, the eye candy to male fans, but she eventually became more independent and self-confident when she was reintroduced to the show back in 1983. Velma has always been the brains of the outfit, and a lot of people have to realize that when some people are nervous, uptight, or frightened, they're going to do certain things that they probably would not normally do initially. Now, in Shaggy's and Scooby's case, everybody thinks that they're both stoners because they eat a lot. Now, it's true that if someone smokes marijuana, they will end up with a case of the munchies. It's a known fact. You don't have to smoke marijuana to know this. But the idea that they were automatically stoners is crazy. Of course, I agree that Shaggy's the beatnik, the loafer, doesn't want to contribute, but it was always him and Scooby that somehow captured the bad guys and solved the mystery. And to reduce Shaggy to Norville, which is Shaggy's real first name. Some people that I've seen YouTube videos on really didn't understand why he was called Norville in this series, but anybody who's a true Scooby-Doo fan knows that Shaggy's real first name is Norville. And in this series, he's against drugs and all that. But towards the end of this final episode, Shaggy's father encourages Norville to start smoking marijuana. Now, what is that going to tell you for when season 2 comes out? Are we going to see that Norville becomes a stoner altogether and starts eating his weight in food? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But, and of course, a lot of people have said this. I know you've said this, Bob, and I agree with it, that at the end of the episode, when they solve the initial murder mystery and they're given keys to the city, they are just not in unison with anything or be together for anyone. There's no I in team, and that's apparent in this series. So apparently Fred bought what will be eventually become the Mystery Machine, and he does start paying it up with the flowers and everything. And the writing on the van is not the Mystery Machine, but it's something else. I forget now what it was word for word, but it had nothing to do with the Mystery Machine, but it did have something to do with solving mysteries. And then of course the series ends, or the season ends, with the sheriff getting murdered by possibly maybe the actual real serial killer. And this show just stunk. It just stunk. I mean, Bob and I did episode runoffs concerning the She-Ra reboot and the He-Man reboot. Compared to this show, they are both masterpieces. But, of course, I didn't think too highly of either show because I happen to be a fan of both He-Man and She-Ra. And as I have pointed out now in our videos, that we don't mess around with the legacies of any cartoon character that's in this league. Whatever legacies they've got, good, bad, or otherwise, we leave them alone. New legacies have been created over the years for these characters. But you will still find SpongeBob SquarePants flipping Krabby Patties at the Krusty Krab. You will still see the original Mystery Inc. gang solve mysteries. You will still see Snoopy battle the Red Baron. You will still see the Autobots battling the Decepticons. You will still see He-Man battling Skeletor. You will still see She-Ra battling Hordak, and the list goes on and on and on. And we don't mess around with that. But we have these characters in our league to be fun, creative, and enjoyable. I've been doing this for over 40 years, and online, it'll be the 18th year we've done this online, and it'll be the 5th season on YouTube. And we hope that you will participate in the post-game shows that I will put up beginning April 9th, when the season officially begins on April 7th. But before we finish this podcast, Bob, I would like for you to just go back episode by episode and the scores that you gave during the course of the episode runoff and why you gave those scores.
All right. Well, for me, I tried to judge this series as if it was written about teenage mystery solvers, but it didn't happen to be about the Scooby Gang. So I looked to see, character development. And when you study literature in your English class in high school, that's one of the things they talk about, is that at the end of a book or a movie, the character has to have learned something and grown so that they are a better person. There was no character development whatsoever in this movie. All the characters are pretty much the same at the end as they are at the beginning. The only exception is that Fred is more aware that his attitudes are very patriarchal, and he needs to treat women as individuals and not as objects. But other than that, Daphne's the same as she always was. Velma's the same she always was. Norville has grown a little bit in that he no longer follows Velma around, and he recognizes that she is a toxic friend, and he's better off without her. But the reason why I didn't score any of these episodes higher than a 3, some of the episodes got a 2, some of them got a 0, was simply because none of the characters learned anything over the course of this show.
Yeah, and as I pointed out at the beginning of these episode runoffs, that this was the 6th such runoff we've done since 2019, and this was by far the lowest score that we've done so far in these episode runoffs. We did an episode runoff with the original Scooby-Doo series, where we pitted episodes that came out before the year 2000 and after the year 2000, because I thought that that was a good time frame to go by when the episodes came out and how they were perceived. And that was the best runoff we ever did. And at no time during that runoff did the scores differ by more than 7 points. It was always close. And you're going to be a fan of the shows that aired before 2000 or after 2000. We here on this channel have almost every variation of Scooby-Doo, with the exception of Scooby-Doo Get a Clue. And we've got a majority of the direct-to-video movies that we present on the weekends. So we don't know yet when this show is going to have season 2. But if and when season 2 comes out, we are going to continue doing another episode runoff for season 2. This will not count as a separate runoff, but a continuation of this runoff. But the 19 points that was scored in season 1 will not carry over to season 2. Season 2 will be judged and rated on its own merit and nothing to do with anybody else. But I will close with this final thought. If Bob and I were to have figured out the 10 worst Scooby-Doo episodes that we've got in our library of shows and pitted them with all 10 episodes of this series, even the worst 10 episodes of the original series still would fare better than Velma. Bob, you agree with me on that?
Yes.
And I don't think there's a doubt in any Scooby-Doo fan's mind that that would be the case. So we're going to wrap up our first ever joint podcast, where we did this podcast unscripted, unrehearsed, and just talk like two ordinary people. We thank you for listening in to this podcast, and we hope that we'll do more of these podcasts in the future. So be sure to look out for them. But for now, this is Robbie Graham
And Bob Mozart.
of the USCFL Network, wishing you peace. Take care and stay safe.